This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 210 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Annette Cormany, Master Gardener Coordinator in Washington County, Maryland, about fall garden prep. The plant profile is on marigolds, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events and this week's garden tasks in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on apple growing during climate change from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Annette Cormany. She is a horticultural educator with the University of Maryland Extension in Washington County, Maryland. Welcome, Annette.
Thank you, Kathy.
Great to have you with us. And we're going to be talking about all things getting the garden ready for fall and the winter season. But before we dive into that, Annette, we'd like to ask our first-time guests of the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
I was indeed born with a green thumb. They pointed and laughed at the nursery. I grew up gardening with my grandparents and my parents. So yes, I was indeed born with a green thumb, and I've plunged it in the soil to make it and fertilized it mightily to make it even greener.
Great. So gardening with your grandparents, were you in the Washington, D.C. Mid-Atlantic region, or where were you gardening at?
I was gardening in south central Pennsylvania, around the Chambersburg area.
Okay. And for our listeners who might not be familiar with Washington County, where you are now, can you describe to them some of the growing conditions, your zone, the soils, and what it's like to grow in Washington County?
Okay. Well, we are blessed with clay and rocks. That's our official soil type. We're in the northwest corner of Washington County in Zone 7. So somewhat similar to DC. And I serve Washington County, West Virginia, Pennsylvania. So I do get to deal with a bit different climates and soils than we're in. So I'm used to switching it up a little.
And I imagine it's a little bit more of an elevation than a lot of the Mid-Atlantic region.
Yes, not so much as Garrett County, which is way out there, but yes, we have elevations. We have lots of hills.
Yeah, so that does mean sometimes dealing with erosion or other types of issues or wind.
Yeah, and gardening on slopes in particular.
For sure. And so for those who are totally not familiar with the geography of the region, how far are you from Philadelphia or from Washington, D.C.?
We're about 2 hours, hour and a half, 2 hours from D.C. and about 4 hours away from Philly.
Okay. That kind of triangulates it for people who know. And how about a little bit about how you came to be a horticultural educator?
Well, I actually had a 25-year career in corporate communications as a director of corporate communications. But, then my green thumb started to itch. And it was a minor itch, but it grew to a major itch. And I really needed to feed it. So I went through the Master Gardener program while working and was hooked. And when an opportunity came up to lead a program 17 years ago, I jumped at the opportunity. And it's been a rewarding and enriching career, answering lots of questions and working with a fabulous bunch of master gardeners.
And I imagine you're giving a lot of talks. And
yeah. Education is the focus of the university and of extension. So yes, I do a lot of teaching.
And bringing in that new group of master gardeners every year.
Yes, that injects a fresh, invigorating batch of energy each time we get a graduating master gardener class.
Yeah, I do a lot of speaking to master gardener groups, and I just love the energy, especially with the incoming ones. They're so hungry for knowledge. It's such a great audience to speak to.
You bet.
And how are you seeing the trend in master gardeners? Are a lot more people applying, younger groups applying of people?
Yes, more recently, we're getting more diversity in our group, and with all shades of that, race and ethnicity and age. One of, I hate to say, gift of the pandemic was employers realized flexibility didn't harm productivity. So a lot of people have more flexibility to take the Master Gardener program and to volunteer. So we have people in our program from 30s to 80s.
That's great. Yeah, I think that really did have some benefit for work for home people. Is a lot of people in the past couldn't do the Master Gardener programs where they were because they were weekdays or interfered with their schedule. So that's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's turn to our topic of the episode, which is fall garden prep. And last spring, I'm going to get the episode number correct. It was episode 184. We discussed spring garden prep with Miri Talabak, another Extension University of Maryland person. And so we wanted to dovetail that with some fall garden prep discussion. And we'll refer a little bit back to that episode too, because I know Miri went into a great deal about not just spring garden prep, but all garden prep. It was such a thorough episode. But let's start off talking about that campaign I hear from a lot of garden centers and nursery that fall is for planting. So there's a big push to have that message get out there because a lot of people, of course, think of spring as planting time. So now is the time to be planting trees, shrubs, and perennials. But Annette, is there anything we should avoid planting in the fall?
Well, there are some things. Fall is a terrific time to plant. Plants tend to adjust a little bit better, don't have to deal with the extreme heat that they going from spring into summer. But some plants don't transplant well in fall. Technically, it's the broadleaf evergreens, the things like the rhododendrons and the azaleas and the boxwoods and hollies. With that broad leaf, they tend to dry out more in the winter, so it's better to plant them in the spring. And they're also a group of plants with fleshy roots. Things like dogwoods and magnolias, willow oaks, and tulip poplars really are best off planted in the spring.
Yeah, those are great. And I was thinking also about camellias in particular are usually not too happy with fall planting.
Yeah, again, that's a waxy leaf, broad-leafed evergreen. So anything you see that's got a broad, shiny leaf, you probably ought to hesitate and make a plan to put it in the spring.
And so what if you just purchased one of those in a pot? Should you put that to the side? Is there somewhere you could store it or do a precaution until spring planting?
Well, if you've got some place where you can heel it in and provide some additional protection from wind, or you can put a pot within a pot and mulch between those two pots, you really just need to give it some extra protection. And certainly if you want to plant something like that in the fall, do it earlier rather than later so it has a chance to get settled in. Water it well, which is always good, and consider using an anti-desiccant. There are different sprays that you can use that provide an extra layer over the leaf to prevent that drying out that they get from cold and wind.
Good advice. And the fact that things still need watering at this point in the season.
Anything that you planted this year, you really should, a tree or shrub, you should really be deeply watering once a week, right up until our first hard frost. And that typically happens actually around Thanksgiving here, the ground penetrating frost. So that deep watering is the single most significant factor in the survivability and of a plant.
Good to know. And yeah, when you say ground penetrating frost, we always think of, the first killing frost might knock back some of those tropicals or annuals or our tomato plants, but we're talking about a real frost or freeze.
Right, something that goes, a foot into the ground. And those happen typically after Thanksgiving.
And it almost seems later and later every year, actually.
Yeah, we've had pretty mild winters with global warming and climate change, you bet.
So let's talk about proper planting techniques. So I bought a small shrub or tree and brought it home from the garden center. What's my next step?
Dig a hole that's about twice as wide as the root ball or the pot. and just as deep. A lot of people want to go deeper and throw things in the hole. Nope, don't need to. So twice as wide, just as deep, backfill with good soil, and again, give it a really good soak. And before you actually put it in that hole, look at the roots. If there's anything spiraling around, loosen it. Even if there isn't anything spiraling around, loosen those roots a little bit because you want them to grow out and into the native soil. And it's best to use the native soil, what you have, because I'm sure you've been terribly careful in making sure that what you have does well here. You really don't need to add amendments.
Yeah, I agree. I think if anything, I'll top dress with some shredded leaf compost or something after I've planted, but I'm not amending the holes that much.
Yeah, people used to put in loads and loads of compost, and those roots would go woohoo through the compost laden soil and then hit the wall of harder compacted soil. And again, that makes roots spiral around. It helps interfere with the plant really doing well for you.
Yeah, and why would you expand into the native soil at all?
Right.
when you're
I've got it easy. I've got it easy here in this nice, loose, fluffy stuff. Come on.
Yeah, and usually you'll find like in 5 to 10 years, those roots never left that beautiful planting hole you created.
Circling round and round.
And so we've had some arborists in the show as guests before, and we've talked about the importance of having the root flare at the soil level.
Yes, you can actually see, if you look closely, an increase in the diameter of the trunk or the stem, and you don't want to bury that. Plants struggle if they're planted either too high or too low. So try to plant at usually it's the level of the soil that was in the pot or the root ball, but again, looking for that little skirt, looking for that little flare, and making sure that that's not buried is really important to help.
And sometimes, especially with perennials, I think a little bit more than shrubs and maybe some fruit trees, I'll hear the advice to plant high, just a little bit high, because the soil is going to settle a bit.
If you're using native soil, you don't get that much settling. I don't want somebody to plant something 4 inches above where it was in the pot. Yeah. It's going to suffer. You also have to think about the root crown with a perennial. You don't want that exposed to winter's cold. So again, try aiming for planting. If the plant was doing well in the pot where it was, it's probably planted at the correct level. Try to mimic that. You can tell by the staining of the soil on the stem where that was and just match that.
And so we talked a little bit about top dressing after you plant.
Right.
For fall mulching, what do you recommend?
Well, I have transitioned more to organic, natural mulches with sustainability. I try to use a lot of leaves and untreated grass clippings in there, but I also do use some shredded hardwood mulch. Use what you have and buy as natural as you can, because part of the mulch does a lot of things. It's going to block weeds. That's what everybody thinks about. It's going to hold moisture. But it also needs to allow for the free air exchange and water exchange. So you want to use something nice and light and fluffy, because part of mulch's purpose is to break down and feed the soil. So, and depth is so important. 1 to 3 inches is what you should be aiming for. And with a little donut of it scooped away from the direct stem, because think about it, it's holding moisture. You don't want it to hold moisture directly against the stem, because that's going to promote dampness that attracts disease and insects. So 1 to 3 inches, but with a little breathing space between the stem or the trunk and the actual depth of the mulch.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of people use a heavy hand, and I'm more thinking of professional landscapers than the home gardener.
Yeah, volcano mulches are real and something that I rail against. I'm looking for a bumper sticker that says "No more mulch volcanoes." I really feel strongly about this, Kathy.
Yeah, and you'll see that inverted kind of V, and then a few years later, the tree or shrub or whatever it's surrounded with. I'm like, are you being paid by the pound of wood chip mulch, or what is going on?
I had a client call me about 3 different trees failing in the same spot, and when I drove up, I nearly drove off the road because they had, and yes, I measured 18 inches of mulch against the trunk, and yeah. Not good at all.
So, yeah, if you have mulch still sitting there on the surface, so
Hmm.
it didn't break down or
Hmm.
it's not quite, do you recommend raking that up, or what do you do? Just mulch right on top of it?
I never have removed. I've never removed mulch because again, it will break down. I try to maintain 2 to 3 inches around my trees.
Mm.
So whether that means adding top dressing a little bit more or looking at it and sticking a ruler in it and saying, okay, we're good. I don't need to do it now. Either of those are fine. You're just trying to maintain a 2 to 3 inch mulch around your trees and shrubs. So beneficial.
And that brings us to the leave the leaves trend. And we talked about that in the spring garden prep episode, but we can
Mhm.
certainly go over that because that is going to be happening soon in our region, in that a tremendous amount of leaves are about to fall from their trees and how we deal with those.
Mhm. Well, leaves aren't litter, they're habitat. We've all changed our perspective on this and understand that providing habitat to beneficial insects helps us because there are an army out there helping to control bad bugs. And protecting pollinators is in our best interest and that of the ecosystem. So many insects, in particular butterflies and moths, shelter in leaf litter. So, letting leaves lie, forming a natural bed around a tree is a great idea. Some people prefer to leave the leaves whole. I do a mixture of chipping and using whole leaves. And I also tend to leave a leafy edge somewhere on my property as habitat. Birds hunt in it. Again, butterflies and moths use it. Woolly bear caterpillars, everybody knows those little guys. They tuck into leaf piles. Luna moths actually wrap their cocoons in leaves. Some butterflies and moths lay eggs on leaves. So leaves are such important habitat.
Yeah, and I think it also depends on what leaves you're talking about. So magnolia might
No.
smother a perennial bed versus like a pin oak.
Exactly. There are some leaves that aren't appropriate. I wouldn't want big old magnolia leaves out there either. But again, the idea is letting some leaves lie is really smart. And we all love visiting natural habitats. And in the woods, those leaves aren't raked. And they're providing wonderful habitat. And I think we are grasping the idea more and more of bringing the natural into our backyards for a healthier habitat for us and for the ecosystem.
Mhm. And that also brings up cutting back your perennials. So a lot of people have the habit of in the fall just chopping back all their perennials to the ground. But I think newer advice in the trend is to leave most of that up or as much as possible through the winter.
Yes, most definitely. We've learned a lot in the last 20 years about habitat. And the fact is that many beneficial insects, in particular pollinators, overwinter in those in hollow stems. Some of them have the ability to chew out stems to make them hollow. So when we're removing the stems, we're removing habitat. We're doing away again with beneficial insects and pollinators. So letting them stand until spring is so wise. And some people actually, when they cut them back in the spring, let them lie as kind of a natural mulch. If you have to cut them back a little earlier, let them lie in some part of your yard so that those beneficial insects and pollinators have a chance to hatch.
Yeah, and I was thinking about how some HOAs and maybe some municipalities and others might look down on some of that, leave the leaves and having the perennials stay up through the winter. So there would be kind of a happy medium if that you do have to clear, like you said, making a mulch pile or something to the side or just doing a rough chop.
Exactly. And, the master gardeners and I feel so strongly about this that we actually had signs made that say, pardon our mess, pollinators at rest, that shows a picture of a messy garden area and some pollinators that were helping. And we plant these in our teaching gardens and in our own gardens because it's a great teaching tool and explains the purpose of what we're doing. So, often an educational sign posted in an area that identifies it as a wildlife refuge, a pollinator area, something that explains it can help everybody feel better and learn why we're doing what we're doing.
I agree. A little bit of signage goes a long way to say, I'm not neglecting this. This is on purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about pruning. So a lot of people think this is a great time to prune their shrubs back, but it really is, like all things gardening, right, Annette? It depends.
Exactly. In most cases, um, pruning stimulates growth. So if you prune now, you're going to get a lot of woohoo growth, tender growth that can get zapped by frost. So the best time to prune most things is in the dormant season. So we're talking late October, November, or even better, January to March. That way, you're not going to vulnerable wood to insects or disease, and your plant is going to be dormant. So it's going to have less stress at being snipped and clipped. And you're also on deciduous trees, not going to have leaves to worry about. You're going to be working with the pure structure, which is how you get really good form when you're pruning.
And I would also precaution against things that are blooming in the spring, especially the earliest blooming things. Maybe that's not what you want to be pruning now.
Yeah, so many people call me with, why aren't my hydrangeas blooming? And I say, well, when are you pruning them? And invariably they're pruning in the summer or the fall. And they're cutting off next year's buds. Spring and summer flowering shrubs start making their buds for the following year, just a month after they're done blooming. So you have that very narrow window when you can prune. So you don't have to prune, but if you do, you need to make sure that you're pruning those plants that bloom in spring and summer right after they are done blooming, so you're not cutting off the show for next year.
And like what you say, you don't have to prune
Yeah.
because you should be asking, why am I pruning this?
Why am I pruning? Are you pruning for shape? Are you pruning to control size? Are you pruning out dead, diseased, and damaged, which you can do any time of the year? But a lot of people, get itchy trigger fingers when it comes to handling their loppers and pruners and do more work than's necessary and perhaps do a little bit of unnecessary nipping and tucking.
Yeah, it can get, you get into it and then you're step back and half the thing is gone.
Yeah. Stop often, always. Stop every 5 minutes when you're pruning and look
Exactly.
at it so you don't have a, dear God, what have I done moment.
I think we've all been a little overzealous sometimes. GardenDC will be back after this short break.
What's new from Apple? There's the new iPhone 16 Pro, built for Apple Intelligence. And it comes with the all-new camera control, giving you an easier way to quickly access your camera tools. The new Apple Watch Series 10 has our biggest display and our thinnest design ever. And this? It's the sound of active noise cancellation, now available on one of 2 new AirPods 4 models. So quiet. Check out all of the new products and new features at apple.com. You can even buy yourself something new. See apple.com for product availability updates. Apple Intelligence coming this fall.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
So let's also talk about perennials. We talked about planting them, but not about digging and dividing.
Well, digging and dividing can be done in the spring or fall. And that really just involves digging up the whole clump and cutting it into sections and replanting it. Somewhat oversimplified, but most perennials, again, do really well with fall or spring, digging and dividing. And the great thing about perennials is they are always going to provide you with free plants.
Mm-hmm.
About every 3 years, most perennials need to be dug and divided. And that means that you've got free plants or you've got free plants to pass along to other avid gardeners.
Yeah, it's a great time to have a plant swap and share those extras.
Mhm.
And so many of us, we have house plants indoors. We've taken them out for their summer vacation. What timing do you recommend for bringing them back in or transitioning them?
I use the 50-degree rule when you start to get a couple of nights that are 50 degrees, which we've had here. It's time to bring your houseplants in before they get zapped.
Mm-hmm.
But make sure you give them a good thorough inspection and look for insects, so that you're not bringing in a problem that could cause problems for any plants that you have indoors. Hose them down at the very least. Give them a shower, hose them down. But do give them a thorough check. But 50 degrees is a good guideline.
And that's about the same timing, I'm guessing, as you're going to pull out some of those tropical bulbs.
Yeah, your cannas, your callas, your dahlias need to be lifted before we get into frost time.
And then those could be cut back and stored for winter.
Yes, there are lots of elaborate guidelines for doing that, but basically you pull them up and brush the dirt off and store them in something like vermiculite or sawdust or peat, in something that breathes a little bit. Late great garden writer Henry Mitchell used to say he kept them in a shoebox under his bed.
That might get a little damp under there. I don't know. That's like,
and it might not be quite cool enough unless you like your bedroom really cool.
How cool are you keeping your bedroom? And also, do you have cats that would explore those shoeboxes?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that.
My cats would definitely open those up and check out what's inside. But yeah, I've been leaving the last few winters. I've been leaving my dahlias in, my cannas in the ground, and they've been overwintering fine. Knock on wood. If I thought it was going to be a really, really cold winter, I might lose them. But I think for caladiums, I'm still not taking that chance yet.
No, I think that's wise.
Mm-hmm. And so once we're talking about tropicals, I'm thinking about annuals and switching out the containers seasonally. Do you have any favorite cool season annuals?
Well, I love the variety of the kale for texture, for color, things like pansies or ornamental peppers. And there's a lot of nice grasses out there too. Even the annual grasses, when they brown out, still look nice and give you some movement and texture.
Yeah, I love the really hardy snapdragons they're breeding now. And I find like calendula does very well for me over winter. And then there's some of those new osteospermum introductions, like cousins of the African daisies, that seem to be coming on the market now.
I have not seen them. I will look.
Yeah, and I've been getting them to winter over, or at least be able to go way into winter and then spring back, after March, maybe January, February, they kind of take a rest.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, looking at switching out some of those containers. And I think that's the really hard decision in that is like, when do I give up on the Sunpatiens or my petunias? They can go into a lot of cool. And then when can I add those out?
You let the plants tell you. They tell you when they're done. I don't let mine in until they're gasping their last breath. I want them to look good. And I also don't want the garden centers to run out of my favorite things. So, I'm inspired by garden trips, and I keep an eye on my friends in pots to see when they're just not completely happy, and then it's time to switch.
Yeah, that's true. If you don't, buy the things while they're available, you're going to probably miss out.
Yeah, don't miss out.
And same in the edible garden, Annette. There's like that line of when do we pull the tomatoes and put in our cool season crops?
Yeah, I'd had it with my cucumbers. I couldn't stand the sight of another cucumber. So a week ago they went out, and some of my tomatoes that weren't happy went out. When they're no longer producing, or they're no longer producing things that taste good, because as it gets cooler, the taste is impaired or changes. It's when we have time, when the plants tell us we're ready, or when we are so bloody tired of seeing another zucchini that we start to go after things. It's really a very personal decision.
Yeah, I think a lot of people hold on to the tomatoes far too long, and then they've kind of missed that window where they could have started a cover crop or
Right.
put in like broccoli seedlings.
Exactly. Yeah, you have to think about what you want to do to enrich your soil and your plantings for next year, and make sure that you include that in your plans for renovation and planting and ripping and tearing.
And what do you recommend for enriching the soil for your edible garden?
Well, you can't really go wrong with compost.
Mhm.
Homegrown is great. But you can also purchase, there's Leaf Grow that is made locally in Montgomery County. So, any of those are good choices. Anything organic, again, I'm a big believer in using what you have. So this time of the year, we usually have some chipped leaves. Put those on. If you've got untreated grass clippings, put those on. You're trying to cover the soil and you're trying to enrich it. And certainly look at cover crops. There's some really nice cover crops that will enrich the soil, lighten the soil. Again, you're trying to cover to suppress weeds, you're trying to hold moisture, and you're trying to build basically green manure, things maybe that you can work into the soil in the spring or just plant into if you don't want to work into the soil.
Yeah, and I'll usually do chopped up straw, not hay, so not the seed heads, around what I'm leaving in the ground.
Good idea. Good idea. Yeah, I sometimes mulch with straw, and I leave that in place as well, chopped.
Yeah, so if I've got like any of the brassicas or greens that I'm trying to grow through the winter, I'll just kind of literally, nestle up the chopped up straw as close as possible to the plants for some protection.
Yes, great idea.
And then, of course, my favorite thing to plant in the fall is garlic.
Yeah. How can you live without garlic? I've heard tell that there are some people that do live without garlic, but I don't know any of them. And it's such an easy plant to grow. You just put those cloves in there. For us, about by the end of October, at the latest mid-November, and then next June, July, by golly, you've got wonderful.
And set it and forget it. That's what I love about it.
Yes, yes.
But I would caution not to try to plant amongst it, because then you're robbing the garlic bulb from getting its big size and nutrition. But there's so much temptation out there because you're like, well, I could stick some greens amongst it.
Nope. Let your babies feed. Give them their own space. You need to have a garlic zone in your garden, an undisturbed garlic zone.
Yeah, you want those bulbs as big as possible. And speaking of bulbs, let's talk about the spring flowering bulbs that we are planting this fall.
Nothing beats the satisfaction of seeing that color in the spring after a long winter, cold winter. So it's smart to invest in bulbs, and there are so very many and lovely native variations of narcissi and a lot of other things. And so I encourage everybody to plant some bulbs.
Yeah, I think I had heard, and maybe we discussed in a previous episode, that the bulbs sales were kind of on the steady or slight decline because they're not a plant that you could just put in the ground and immediately you have flowers, right? Like an
there is
annual.
no immediate gratification. It's delayed gratification. You have to be patient. Gardening teaches us patience. But even if you just pick one type of bulb that catches your eye, start small. And get the reward from that, and then you start thinking about intermingling different types of bulbs, or maybe naturalizing some bulbs, or maybe even dedicating a bed to bulbs so you have a constant display. Because if you plan it right, you can have from February to May bulbs coming up.
Yeah, and you can even set some aside specifically for cutting to make indoor bouquets. Because I know a lot of us, you have those beautiful daffodils or tulips coming up in the garden, or camassia, and you're like, ooh, but if I cut a dozen of those, I don't have so many outside.
Right, good. And some bulbs are fun to plant in containers. to, again, nudge along so that you have some color indoors. So that's another option of playing with bulbs.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any fall bulb planting tips?
Well, really, it's about depth. Bulbs should be planted about 3 times. They should be planted as deep as 3 times the width of a bulb. So if you've got a 1-inch bulb, you're going to plant it 3 inches deep. If you plant too low, you might just get leaves. If you plant too high, cold might zap it. So about 3 times the diameter of the bulb deep is a good guideline.
And sometimes when you have that clay rocky soil, I find like a really good tool, like a razor spade, like with a serrated edge to it, can get in there and get those bulbs down where you need them to be.
Exactly. And, I always tell people it's so much easier when you plant bulbs just to prep the whole bed. Prep an area. Don't try to dig individual holes unless you're naturalizing. But prep the whole bed. And some people are big believers in feeding those bulbs to start out with. That does seem to give them a little bit of a boost if you put that
Yeah, I agree. I think digging one large hole, a shallow hole, and putting several bulbs in,
in.
a lot easier than 10, 20, 30 individual little
You
holes
bet.
everywhere.
You bet.
So much easier. And I think it looks more natural the next
Exactly.
season. Yeah. So that's always nice to see. So now that it's September, we're looking at that fall lawn renewal sequence, the SON, September, October, November. And for those people who still have turf grass lawns, maybe we should talk about that timing.
Yeah, there's fall is a good time to fertilize your lawn. So if you want to look at that, I recommend you visit your neighborhood friendly extension service and get a soil test kit, or visit our site to get that, and do it right. Don't put things down willy-nilly, rather than, give your soil what it needs. Give the lawn what it needs to beef up. So start with a soil test, and this is a good time to, again, apply that and do a core aeration if you haven't done that for a while, to pull plugs out of the soil so that your anything you're adding from compost to fertilizer is going to go down to the roots of the plant. But what we're really encouraging people to do is think about less lawn. How much lawn do you really need? Lawn is monoculture, and that really doesn't help pollinators, beneficial insects, other wildlife. So maybe think about shrinking your lawn. And it isn't as hard as people imagine. So maybe narrowing the lawn, shrinking it a little bit, and take an easier approach to it. Smothering grass with cardboard and mulch, or lasagna gardening, which is just layers of organic, means you don't have to dig. And you can do that now, and by spring you're going to have something that you can plant into. Mm-hmm. So there are easier ways to shrink your lawn, which is something that we are suggesting you do. So ask yourself, how much lawn do you really need? And maybe you can do with a little bit less.
Yeah, you were singing my tune, Annette. Since I'm a big proponent of ground covers and have my recent book, Ground Cover Revolution, I talk about a lot of the same things.
Well, and we didn't really talk about ground covers when we were talking about what to put around trees and shrubs. What I do now, instead of slinging a lot of mulch, is plant ground covers around my trees, or perennials around my trees and shrub beds. Because you don't have to have boatloads of mulch. It's much better to create an ecosystem, which is, I'm sure, what you're...
Yeah, and that's a great point, that this is a green or living mulch that we're talking about as a ground cover. So you don't have to reapply an organic, but, we would call it dead, right, shredded leaves or anything like that. So, but it's still an organic addition to the soil.
Exactly. And you're providing habitat. Many insects drop into leaf litter, drop into ground covers, perennials to overwinter. So if you're trying to help your allies in the garden, your beneficial insects and your pollinators, the best thing you can do is get some layers of ground cover in there.
Yeah, and fall is a great time to establish new ground covers. Also, as you said, to create new beds. So if you're looking towards next spring and thinking, I want to expand my vegetable garden, this is a great time to dig that bed or build a raised bed and fill it and let that settle. Maybe add some aged manure.
Yeah, the lasagna garden with layered organics, use what you have from grass, untreated grass clippings to leaves to trimmings to newspaper to straw, is really a fun way to build a bed, and you make great soil. You just make terrific soil.
Yeah, it's always so much better to go do that in the fall and then start fresh in the spring and not have to do it in the spring.
Yeah,
because you're
it's
like,
there.
yes, yeah,
It's done.
yay. You're like so ready to start planting right away in the spring. The prep is not what you want to be doing at that point.
Exactly.
So this is a great time to be doing that over the fall and winter. And another thing we can be doing over the fall and winter to prep us to get a good start in the spring is maintaining our tools, especially the expensive ones that we've invested in. So any tips about sharpening, cleaning, and storing those great tools?
Gardening is a messy art, isn't it? So our tools get dirty, we get dirty. So it's good to clean them and maybe use a little light steel wool or Brillo pad to really go over the blades. Take some of the ones that you can take apart so you can clean them thoroughly, dry them, and then you can protect them from rust with a little vegetable oil. Some people use something like WD-40, but basically you're cleaning and drying. If anything has a wooden handle, you certainly want to get some linseed oil or vegetable oil on that to keep them from drying out. And also try to store your tools hung. If they're on the ground, they're going to pull moisture and be more likely to rust and have issues. But, if you take care of your tools, you can have tools for 20 years. People don't realize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say you've invested in them, so taking a few minutes, and of course you might still be using them a little bit over the winter time.
Right.
But getting some of that sharpening and cleaning done over the winter.
Yeah, and you can sharpen with a sharpening stone. You're basically making it wet and using a circular motion across the bevel. There are some sharpening services that you can use if you don't want to sharpen your tools yourself, but it's actually a pretty straightforward process.
Yeah, unless it's something super complicated, like I'm thinking of some of those weed tools with interweaving type of blades. I would not attempt those myself.
No, we're going to let a pro do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe watch them the first time and be like, okay, that's how you do it. All right. But yeah, those are really good tips. And I would say even a good time to kind of evaluate, right? What went well this year, didn't go so well, looking back over the growing season.
Yeah, if you wait till spring, you're going to forget. And not because I'm of a certain age. You forget. You want to think of things when it's fresh. So keeping a little garden notebook. I have a binder that I have pages for different plants, and I always use the front to make notes for the year. And, write down 5 things that you'd like to do or you'd like to do differently. That keeps it manageable and gives you some goals and things to get excited about for next year.
And also when you're looking at seed catalogs or looking towards ordering and shopping, you can kind of evaluate, well, I need to choose a different type of carrot. This one didn't do so well for me.
Exactly. And again, make notes when it's fresh. And don't wait because black holes exist in brains and other areas. That information just disappears. Do you remember, honey? No, I don't remember. I thought you would. So yeah, write it down where it goes.
Yeah, and you always have that phone handy nearby. So looking back through your digital photos, I always find that really helpful.
Yes, definitely. Take pictures. And that gets us through winter. We can look at those pictures and remember and project so that we just don't have our noses pressed up against the window glass sighing where our garden is going to be. You can actually see how lovely it was this past year.
Yeah, always nice to look back at those. So a few things that we should be doing in the fall to prep for winter include shutting off our water sources.
Yeah, it's smart to drain your hoses. Take a look at your drip irrigation system and make sure everything's drained. Do any patching of your hoses that you need and coil them up so they don't kink. So yeah, you want to get the water out of there so it doesn't freeze and blow up bad things.
Yeah, I think same thing if you're rain barrel is like a smooth-sided rain barrel with a seam down it. You might drain that and turn that over.
Yeah, I always do that with my rain barrels, and that's a real good way to blow up an expensive rain barrel is to forget to drain it and flip it.
And usually I'll caution people about their ceramic or terracotta pots that are really expensive. The cheaper ones, they're gonna bust usually in our freeze thaw cycle that we have. But if it's something really precious to you, you might look at storing that.
Yeah, I move things into a garage or I have a sunroom that stays a little above freezing, so that's where my pots live in the winter.
And do you clean them out and take out the soil, or do you just bring them back in whole?
I clean them out. Because I don't want them to, number one, I usually refresh the soil. Okay, Kathy, confession time. There might be one or two that might perhaps have some soil in them, but I do my best in the fall to get them cleaned out. Again, in the spring, all I want to do is plant. I don't want to mess with that. I want as much done in the fall as I can because spring's crazy planting time.
And I think another great thing to be doing at this time of year is collecting seeds.
Yes. Collect seeds from the plants that you love. Keep them in envelopes. Again, they need to breathe a little bit. You don't want them sealed necessarily in jars unless you put a little packet of something like dry milk in there, a desiccant. But it's smart to save seeds, especially if you're growing heirlooms or rare natives or something you just love and you want to share. It's a real pleasure to keep that tradition going on both heirloom plants and pass along plants. We have lost a lot of diversity in seed availability, and as individual gardeners, we can keep that going by planting and sharing seeds from, in particular, heirlooms and native plants or rare plants.
Very true. And so our last thing on my list that I note for the fall always is there is a stop fertilizing date in Maryland that is mandated by law. Other areas don't have it as an official law yet, but may be coming to your area soon.
Yeah, November 15th is the date here, and that's for a number of reasons. It's to limit excessive fertilizer, but also you don't want to fertilize so late that you're stimulating growth that's going to get zapped. But it's designed primarily as an environmental protection, so that you're not getting that fertilizer down at a time when it's going to erode, it's going to wash into streams. So we're trying to limit the amount of fertilizer that's applied after a certain date so that it doesn't percolate somewhere we don't want it to percolate.
Yeah, and it's just common sense that at that point, the plants don't need any fertilizing. Even your indoor house plants, I'm cutting back on fertilizing going into the dormancy of winter.
Exactly. And, mature, healthy trees and shrubs really don't need fertilizer. But if you think you need it, again, I'm an extension agent. I'm going to go back to get your soil test and see what your plants need so that you make sure you're giving them what they need. And you're not spending more time or money applying something you don't and that might, again, percolate into the water system and cause some pollution. So get the soil test, do it right.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Annette, for sharing with us. And how can our listeners contact you to find out more, especially about soil testing?
Okay. Well, I'm happy to talk to anybody by phone or by email. My phone is 301-791-1604. And my email is acormany@umd.edu. And Cormany is Cormany. And the last part of that is UMD for University of Maryland and EDU for educator. So acormany@umd.edu is the best way to reach me.
Excellent. Any final advice, Annette, for fall garden prep?
Plant some natives. Everyone is understanding that natives are so important for pollinators and beneficial insects and a healthy, balanced landscape. So I like Doug Tallamy's Homegrown National Park principle, where we all take a little bit of responsibility for growing a healthy habitat in our backyards to make our backyards, our communities, and the world a little better.
Excellent. Thank you, Annette.
You're most welcome. Thank you, Kathy.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is,
"Thank you for calling. Please listen to your list of 46 possible service options."
which is why when you choose USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable. 24/7 online service for claims, access to roadside assistance, and more, all at the touch of a button. Start getting the service you deserve. Get a quote today. USAA. Ability to receive a quote depends on membership eligibility. Membership eligibility and product restrictions apply and are subject to change. USAA means United Services Automobile Association and its affiliates, San Antonio, Texas.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
Marigold plant profile. Marigold, Tagetes species, is an annual flower that attracts beneficial insects, making them a great companion plant to your vegetable garden. Marigolds bloom in shades of yellow, orange, and red. They flower continually from summer into fall. Marigolds have a distinctive scent which helps to deter whiteflies and rabbits. There are 50 species of marigolds, including African marigolds, which, despite the name, are actually native to Mexico and Central America. These tend to be the taller kinds and are quite drought tolerant. French marigolds tend to be smaller, bushier, and more compact. The smallest of all are the cygnet marigolds, which are petite plants, rarely growing over a foot tall. These kinds are perfect for containers or edging a path. All marigolds are easy to grow from seed, and their seeds are easy to save and store for planting next year. Directly sow the seeds in a full sun spot in late spring or early summer. They do not normally need fertilizing. When watering them, aim the water at their roots and not their foliage. Be careful not to overwater them, as they can rot in too wet soil conditions. You can deadhead them as the flowers fade, or shear the whole plant back if it gets leggy and floppy, but it's not necessary, as marigolds are generally low care and will still thrive with benign neglect. Marigolds can be cut for fresh bouquets or dried for long-lasting flower arrangements. Marigolds, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my favorite thing is the red variegated cotton plants that are at my community garden plot. They are looking stunning, like little Japanese maple trees, but with those gorgeous little hibiscus-like flowers. In garden tips that we shared this week, we recommended that you plant nectar sources such as goldenrod, liatris, Joe Pye weed, and asters to assist with the monarch migration happening this fall. Local gardening events that you might want to attend if you're in the Washington, D.C. region include a native plant sale that's happening at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Silver Spring and sponsored by Chesapeake Natives. This is a native plant sale that is taking place online, and then the pickup will be on Sunday, September 22nd in the White Oak, Maryland area. You will need to get your orders in by Thursday, September 19th, and you can do so by going to chesapeakenatives.org. Another local event you might want to attend is at the U.S. Botanic Garden in Washington, D.C., and that is Repotting Orchids, an on-site drop-in program. The USBG's Look and Learn drop-in demonstration encourages visitors to come by the garden to connect with their horticultural experts on staff. And George Gunter will be in the Conservatory Garden Court showing how to repot orchids. Stop by to strengthen and stretch your skill set. That will be from 12:30 to 2:30 p.m. And this is free. It's a drop-in program. No registration is needed. Happy gardening.
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening Network with Apple Growing Adaptation Strategies for Climate Change by Amanda MacArthur. In apple growing season, the thought of biting into a crisp, juicy apple fresh from your own tree never fails to bring a smile to my face. But lately, I've noticed some changes. Have you? Maybe your trees are blossoming earlier than usual, or perhaps last summer's heat wave left your apples sunburned in your tree stress. If you're nodding along with me, you're not alone. As fellow backyard orchardists, we're all facing new challenges as our climate shifts. The good news? With a little know-how and some creative problem solving, we can help our beloved apple trees not just survive, but thrive in these changing conditions. As weather patterns shift due to climate change, backyard apple growers face new challenges in maintaining healthy, productive trees. Increasing temperature fluctuations, unpredictable frosts, and heat waves can all impact apple tree health and fruit yields. However, with some proactive measures and adaptive techniques, you can help your small orchard thrive even as conditions change. Before diving into specific adaptation strategies for apple growing, it's important to understand the main climate-related risks that are facing apple trees now. Number 1, early spring frost damage to buds and blossoms. 2, insufficient winter chill hours for proper dormancy. 3, heat stress during the summer months. 4, drought and irregular rainfall patterns. And 5, increased pest and disease pressure. By addressing these key areas, you can significantly improve your orchard's resilience to changing weather patterns. First, for the frost protection, these late frosts pose a major threat to apple production, and they can damage or kill the delicate buds and blossoms. So there are several methods to winterize and protect your trees in the spring. Site selection, where cold air flows downhill, so avoid low-lying areas where frost pockets can form. Delay your pruning. Use frost cloth or row covers. Get a sprinkler system. Wind machines, those can help mix the warmer air from above. As far as heat stress management, consider these approaches to help keep your trees cool. Adequate irrigation, mulching, shade cloths, and pruning for airflow. To enhance your overall orchard resilience, try diversifying your varieties, improving your soil health, water management, integrated pest management, and tree training. By embracing these adaptive practices, you're not just protecting your own trees, you're contributing to the broader knowledge base of climate-resilient fruit production. Your backyard orchard can become a model of sustainability and a valuable resource for your local community as we all work to adapt our growing practices to a changing world. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. You can become a listener supporter for as little as 99 cents a month by going to the supporter link in our show notes or directly to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/GardenDC/support. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on social media at WDC Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, and Pinterest, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Please take a minute to share us on social media with #GardenDC so other gardeners can find us too.